Today on the Conscious Fertility podcast, I'm talking to my colleague from AcuBalance Wellness Center, Kevin Yee-Chan, who not only practices Chinese medicine, practices the art of acupuncture, but also Qi Gong. And today we're going to specifically talk about Qi Gong for fertility. And, like I do all guests, let me give an introduction to Kevin, and then we'll start asking him questions and finding out how Qi Gong can, or why would you want to incorporate it into your routine for not over overall health, but to help optimize your fertility. So Kevin goes by he and they, and he's an acupuncturist, Qi Gong, and yoga practitioner. He's an artist who has been fascinated by the functions of the body for as long as he can remember. And he did graduate magna cum laude from Pacific Rim College, and he's certified as an ERYT 500 yoga teacher. In his first career, he was a ballet dancer, which is how he has so much compassion and understanding for the aches and pains that come into our clinic as well. And he continually returned. When he was a dancer, he would go to acupuncture yoga as potent tools for his own healing and various injuries and illnesses, which has put him onto the path for himself to become a practitioner. And he's gifted by his approach to weave modern somatic, so somatic as in body sciences, with the Eastern healing arts. And this is so important because so many people have experienced trauma. Fertility can be a traumatic experience for some. They describe it as fertility trauma often. And these emotions, according to Chinese medicine and even now modern science, these emotions, this trauma can get trapped in our tissues, our cells. And so these somatic sciences that Kevin practices, acupuncture, yoga, and Qigong, are ways to help release it from the body so we have that flow. He believes everyone's health journey is unique and it's a work of art. His clinical practice at AcuBalance is ignited by discovering each person's distinct alchemy of vitality and providing patients with a heart-centered, research-based space to address conditions like fertility and prenatal care. He looks at digestive and hormonal issues, anxiety and stress-related conditions, sees a lot of musculoskeletal, and he is queer and POC-aware care as well. Kevin is trained in Tuina, Chinese medical massage, reflexology, medical Qigong, shadow yoga, nonviolent communication. That's where we get along, eh, Kevin, so well when we chat. It's the nonviolent communication. I never feel threatened. And polyvagal theory to support Western science and the body's full spectrum of health and well-being, both short and long term, by the way. In his spare time, you can find Kevin experimenting in the kitchen, making music, dancing, learning about new cultures, and exploring the natural world. Oceans and sunsets are his favorites. And I trust Kevin with my own body because he's one of the practitioners that works on me a lot on the emotional and physical level. So I trust him greatly. And so easy for me to trust him with the team and the patients that we see at AcuBalance. So Kevin, welcome to the Conscious Fertility Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we talk about why Qigong for fertility, how many ways can we spell and pronounce Qigong? What do we got going on here?
Oh, I've heard all sorts of things along the years. Qi Gong, Qi Gong, Kai Gong. I don't know. There's a bunch of different ways.
Because I see it spelled a lot CHI, but we like to spell it QI.
I think phonetically, in English, CHI is kind of a nice phonetic spelling because I usually pronounce it Qi. There's other people that pronounce Qi. But again, it's, bridging so many different cultures and different avenues of receptivity of this lineage. So I'm pretty open to however it's said and expressed.
So a lot of our listeners and the men and women that you see at AcuBalance are looking to grow their families. And this is an interesting modality. And so can you start with just why Qigong for fertility? Like, why does this interest you? And you have an interest that we make more awareness to the public about this modality as well, this healing art.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what it comes down to, what we talk about in the clinic so often, is nourishing the soil, right? And this is a concept in Chinese medicine, largely across the whole spectrum of Chinese medicine, that when we nourish the soil, when we kind of nourish our own body and being, then we create vitality for new seedlings, right? New fruits to blossom. And so coming into really a state of vitality with our own body and being is, in my opinion, the very first step of fertility. And it's also the most foundational piece that we can kind of lay that just builds a lot of other great tools on top of it for us to feel steady and stable in this journey that we're going on, because fertility, like you said, can be quite a journey.
And as you shared, nourish the soil, this idea to nourish the soil before you plant the seed. There's many ways to get to that state of vitality. And fertility often requires you to be in the, when you look at a range from, to the far left or right, or call it 50 to 100 when you look at grades at school, right? Do you
Right.
want to be in the bottom 10% or the top 10%, you know? And fertility, often to conceive a child and have that healthy child, we got to get our range of vitality into that top 10%. And so this is another tool from a Chinese medicine perspective to help bring about vitality.
Yeah, and it's a tool that, it's so accessible. It's movement and meditation. It's intentional movement, right? When it comes down to it. And I feel like so many of us have access to that, and we have access to it in lots of different pockets of time in our day, sometimes when we don't even realize or think of right away. So I like to imagine that it's a foundation and a practice that can really permeate kind of the different pockets of our day, and in that way really kind of lay a track and a foundation of wider support for us on the fertility journey.
So it's accessible and it's a practice, meaning you don't do this once and you're done. This is something that becomes part of your life, like you brush your teeth, or people that actually do aerobic exercise is something that you would do regularly.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's really kind of where the power of most practice lies in my experience, right? So I have lots of experience in the body, like you said, as a dancer and as a yoga and Qi Gong practitioner, and now more so in the clinic as an acupuncturist. But one of the really amazing qualities that I've discovered through embodied work is there's a lot of power in repetition, right? And there's a joy in that kind of discipline that we start to kind of discover over a wider breadth of time. And that joy can really kind of shift the ways that our body regulates in really profound ways. And so being able to, it's really easy to have these experiences sometimes that are really profound and concentrated. Some people talk about, going on retreat, right? And having a yoga retreat or a Qigong retreat. And, you're so impacted by it for the few days that you're on it, maybe like 3 or 5 or 7 days if we're lucky to have that. But really, kind of the continuity of that practice is how do we kind of insert or absorb the power of those practices in small moments every day?
Why Qigong for fertility then? From a Western perspective, I understand big picture, it improves vitality. Look, if you're functioning, if your organs are functioning well, and the tissue's functioning well, and the hormones are balanced, then this is all ways to optimize your fertility. But can you talk about, is there any evidence and just kind of what's happening when people do this repetition? And you call Qigong basically, we'll talk more about what it really is, but you said it's intentional movement, it's a form of meditation. What data, what research is out there right now using Qigong for well-being and for fertility?
Yeah, so there's been some studies on the length of our telomeres and how that relates to aging, and how that relates to the vitality in our body and the resources that we have in our body to heal and to conceive.
I have that book right beside me. So, because there's a book by Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn and Alyssa Epple called The Telomere Effect, right? So they talk a lot
Exactly.
about that research. What do you remember what they shared a bit in their book or in their research?
Yeah, so, the research really is, and this is also coming back to lots of traditions that have been passed on for thousands of years, is that the way that our body is most supported to be resilient in the face of challenge, and also to be supported and vital at a foundational level, and to really be with the process of aging in the most graceful way possible, is to make small but noticeable habits, right, throughout our day and continually throughout our days. Like we were talking about before, it's nice to have these impactful experiences over like a few days, get away on a vacation if we can, have some time off. But what's really important is to create habits in our daily rhythm that support a calm nervous system, that support that engagement of the parasympathetic nervous system, so that our body comes back to rest and digest on a regular basis and has a different baseline.
You know, I heard you talk about the parasympathetic nervous system. You're sharing that Qigong has shown a positive effect on that. And you use the term rest and digest. And I've heard it also called the rest and digest breed and feed nervous system. And so emphasis here is on breed. And if your parasympathetic nervous system's going, I hear in the clinic when you're talking to patients how it allows for that flow and receptivity, which is part of the fertility journey when we think of it from a Chinese medicine perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we're talking about how we incorporate this practice and why into our daily lives now as they are, our modern lives. And our modern lives are filled with all kinds of stressors. That's for sure. I think we all feel that, right? And the scope of change that's happened, that's kind of shifted our pathogens in a way to things like anxiety and stress is really profound. And so to be able to recognize that and to take action and make small steps every day or every week, but regularly, that balance off all of these stressors that we're faced with, I think is just super important.
And the other part that I caught you saying that I want to kind of emphasize is you talked about in the research on the telomeres in the book that I had shared, The Telomere Effect, that in their paper, they showed that Qi Gong had changed the telomere length. And so why is that relevant? Or maybe share a little bit about what telomeres are in an easy to understand way.
Right. So telomeres, I'm going to talk about it in a little bit of Chinese medicine language,
Well, I
since
like that.
we're kind
I'll
of in
understand.
that
I'll
vein,
understand that. Maybe I'll convert
right?
it to a layperson's. Go for
Yeah,
it.
we could think of it almost as Jing, as essence, right? There's this kind of essence that we carry in our body that is governing longer term systems of life, such as growth, such as reproduction, aging, right? All these different phases that we might go through physiologically. You think about a female bodied person, and it's very much in charge of as well the menstrual cycle, right? And the phases of menopause and all these kind of bigger shifts. And so having a healthy telomere length, that in itself, that term may be up for discussion, like what is a healthy telomere
Yeah.
length? The longer our telomeres are, the more kind of resource we have in terms of this Jing and this essence, right? To continue proliferating. Because each time a cell replicates, the telomere gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Right. So as our cells replicate through the natural stressors of life, and maybe through increased stressors of life, if we have challenges or traumas that we're faced with, which inevitably we will, these telomeres shortening, they start to kind of dwindle our resources in terms of how long we can regenerate and how long that cell can regenerate and that telomere can continue having a healthy lifespan.
I like how you brought this into the Chinese concept of health and reproduction. And so these telomeres, which people in the scientific community often use a metaphor, they're like the plastic tips on the end of your shoelace. And these are at the end of the chromosomes. And like you're saying, as they shorten, we get higher risk of disease and the cell's lifespan shortens. And so you don't want them to shorten at an accelerated rate. And when you think about fertility, we want to stay as biologically young as possible. So if you're 40 chronologically, but your body's biologically 50, it's hard to reproduce, even though chronologically 40-year-old women can get pregnant. But if you're biologically 50, not the case. In their research on using Qi Gong as one of the modalities, they showed that this slowed down the shortening, the accelerated shortening of the telomeres, which we interpret that as it's slowing down that accelerated biological aging. And they even showed in their studies that the health of the man and the woman leading up to conception will impact the telomere length and then the woman's pregnancy. So you're setting the health blueprint of their future child. What I liked how you just brought that into Chinese medicine. So we talk about the Jing or the essence as you shared. Have you ever heard the analogy and metaphor where it's like a candle, your Jing's the candle, and once the wax is gone, Jing, there's no more life. And so if you burn the candle hard, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you burn that flame really bright, lots of stress, then the
Yeah.
wax melts quicker. And so you only have so much. It's a finite amount, and you want to conserve it as much as you can. I liked how you were bringing that into the Jing in essence because we need that in Chinese medicine to reproduce. So you want to tie some more of that in because I find that fascinating. I think the listeners may like to hear a little bit more about that now that we've kind of brought in the telomere
For
effect of it,
sure. Yeah.
evolution.
I think there's another thing that I want to touch on with what you said, and that difference between chronological and biological age, right? Because we all know folks that are in their early 20s, but maybe they're quite severely sick, right? Have had lots of illnesses. So biologically, their body, it's aged quite a bit. And also the reverse. There's people who chronologically are maybe in their 60s or 70s in terms of years, but biologically, their systems are maybe back in their 30s or 40s, right? This is, I think, something really important to consider is that our chronological age doesn't always, for sure, it's a good marker, and especially with lots of our Western systems, it's a good marker, but it's not always indicative of your total health. So bringing in that difference, and it might be semantics, but it's also there's a clear difference between chronological and biological age, is where we start to kind of decipher and to discern what resources we have and what resources we have in terms of, in Chinese medicine, jing or essence, right? That really kind of foundational well and reserve of energy that we've got in our body.
And Qi Gong is one of the tools. You know, there's diet, there's lifestyle. We use Chinese herbs, acupuncture, but here we're talking about Qi Gong is another way to conserve your essence, your jing, your telomere length, and sometimes even reverse it some.
Yeah, yeah. And so here's the thing is like I appreciated that analogy you brought up about the candle going down and that like the candlestick is our jing. I think as a blanket statement, we get told that in Chinese medicine school that the jing is irreplaceable. And to a certain degree, it's true. We're all gonna die one day. That's just part of life. That's just part of the cycle of life. And there's also ways to replenish our jing.
Absolutely. Well, you know, metaphors are never perfect, so you are able to add a little bit more wax. But one thing I want to clarify to our listeners, because we're talking about this chronological and biological age as examples, although research has shown certain interventions like Qigong, diet and lifestyle can slow down accelerated biological aging, so the shortening of the telomeres, for example, and often sometimes can reverse it where it lengthens them again. When we talk about the biological age and chronological age, I gave the example, you're 40 chronologically, but your body's behaving biologically 50. In theory, you can become chronologically and biologically 40 again, but we're not going to make you biologically 35 or 25. You're going to go as good as your chronological age. So the other idea is if you're 55 chronologically, the best we're going to get you is 55 biologically. So like our candle example, there's some limitations, but if you're in your
Right.
reproductive window chronologically and biologically, your hormones and the way you're responding to, say, IVF cycles, there is an opportunity to see if we can help your chronological and biological age match. And Qigong is one of those tools.
For sure. Yeah. It's important to consider all the scopes of references, right? And not take anything to extremes. And Qigong is so helpful in kind of bringing our biological age back to its most vital at whatever chronological age we are.
And is it like, you know, coming from the West, so many people want to have a big sweat and aggressive movement. I know you have a series of Qigong practices available through AccuBalance, like you do it in your practice and you also the online courses. Can you share though, like, because some have never heard of Qigong. So how would you describe it? And for those that like a workout, I'm understanding is still you can, if you're not exercising, it can be sore a little after, right? It's not super.
Yeah, I think especially in the West, we tend to think of exercise as this really fiery, active, sweaty thing. And yes, it is, and it can be. But we can also work lots of subtle layers of the body and lots of subtle connections and foundations of the body. And it's been my experience, and it's been shared with me through many teachers, their experiences as well, but I'll speak to my own, that it's oftentimes actually the small, subtle changes that we make in our foundation that can have the biggest effects. So I like to sometimes kind of bring in this analogy into the treatment room that if we steer the rudder of about 1 degree different, take about 5 hours, 10 hours a day, we'll be in a completely different place. And so the Qigong exercises that are offered, you know, through the coursework, online work, through AccuBalance, they're not super fiery and super sweat inducing, perhaps, like something like a HIIT class. But what we're doing is we're kind of sifting down into the layers of our body and finding these micro attachments and micro awareness of how we can hold ourselves differently. And so one of the things that I like to talk about in these practices is allostatic load. So the load of stress that our body is is able to digest and to take on. And just posturally, if we think about that, because this is physical practice. So if you're standing or seating, for example, right now, if you just kind of stand up tall or sit up tall and close your eyes and kind of tune into your body, is there a way that you can notice where you're supported? Are your muscles holding you up? Are your bones holding you up? Are your tendons holding you up, right? And so when we talk about a physical practice like Qi Gong that integrates energetics, we're taking about 80% of the weight into the bones, 80% of the weight into the bones, so that the muscles and the connective tissues have a little bit more pliancy, plasticity to move and react when they really need to. The thing with modern exercise, as we kind of perceive it today, is that it's heavily focused on muscle, heavily focused on muscle. You even look at diagrams of, ancient Chinese anatomy, and the bodies are shaped very differently. They're much more round, and kind of the pathways that are illuminated within that anatomical depiction, they're much more analogous to a garden. If we look at anatomy that's depicted through more a Greco-Roman lens, which is for the most part what we have here in North America, it's very muscle-based, right? And so we're familiar with that. And lots of times our bodies are holding themselves up by muscle. We're having these holding and these guarding patterns that actually start to constrict the circulation to our organs, to our vital organs. Whereas if we divert that pattern of holding to the bones, about 80% to the bones, we're freeing up the muscle tissue and the connective tissue to move a little bit more fluidly, to let the circulation go back to the organs when they need to. And then also to allow our muscles and tendons to react when they need to in a very appropriate way, rather than in a habitually stuck way.
I remember when I don't practice Qigong, but I remember when we had to learn Qigong in our training for Chinese medicine school, that I was a little sore after the first couple of days. It wasn't like, I thought like this is silly at first, right? It was so slow and I thought like the breathing, but it was hard to hold some of those positions. So I did think it was a bit of a workout, but in a different way than we're used to in the West.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's the thing about, when we start to dial things down into a different rhythm, it's a little bit slower than maybe what we're generally used to. It'll seem maybe boring at first, but we're digging into those subtler layers of the foundation and the body. And so there's different ways of, of accessing activation and different parts of the body that get sore, for sure.
And there's a meditative practice to it, and there's so much research on meditation and the benefits of that for health and vitality and longevity. And so you're bringing in some subtle movement, like if you describe it, how you've described it to me in the past, there's subtle movement, there's breathing, and then there's some intention as well. Is that the meditative part, like your thought process?
Yeah. And so this is, I think, one of the beautiful things about something that's so simple, like Qigong, beautiful and challenging. It can be challenging to do something so simple, but there's also something very beautiful about it in that there's not a lot of fanfare to it, right? It's coming back to your breath, it's coming back to your intention, it's coming back to awareness of your body, proprioception and space. Yeah, and so when we start to elongate and slow down the movements, just think of it, for example, okay, so if you're used to weightlifting, right? If you're doing a curl with a dumbbell and you're used to doing a certain speed, and just if we would take an experiment and we would slow down the speed of your curl by maybe twice as slow as you normally do it. And you can start to notice when you do that, there's different articulations in the joints and the muscles that start to be illuminated and awakened in your consciousness, right? And so we're kind of digging into these micro attachments that then correspond with fascial lines in the body, right? And how the fascia kind of breathes and holds all the organs and the muscles and the bones. And so we can use the body holistically as a whole system to start to weave not just this physical proprioception of where we are in space, but also kind of the mental and emotional, right? And so that's where the meditative aspect comes in, and some of the help of Chinese medicine and its theory comes in is because all of the tissues in our body and all of the organs in our body, they associate to kind of different seasons and different emotions in our lives, right? And so we can be able to start to, even if you don't know that, you can make your own language for what you're feeling in your body as you start to move a little bit more slowly and bring more attention to what comes up.
And this meditative and slow practice, it makes you aware. To practice this, you have to be focused. You have to be aware. And you and I have had many discussions on just consciousness and conscious work, Qigong being a tool as that in that awareness, in that state of presence is where a lot of magic, miracles, things happen.
Hmm.
So you're
Yeah.
seeing qigong as part of that process too, but at least we're getting something to do. Because for me to just sit and meditate, I'm more of a dynamic type meditator, and so
Yeah.
qigong is to get in that presence, that awareness, and meditation. It would feed that part of me that needs to do something, and so I think I would be interested in qigong. But I'm just curious because the people that you're seeing, are they receptive to it in the treatment room? They want the acupuncture. It's very material, like you're putting an acupuncture needle in somebody. I know you do some body
Totally.
work on people. How have you found the receptivity for the qigong and the feedback you're getting from the people that you see that are starting to incorporate this into their livelihood?
I think it really is always dependent on the person and where you're at. And what I'm a real big fan of is having a range of tools that we can use that meet us where we're at. And I feel like Qigong is a real key tool in that tool belt like you're talking about to kind of dip into meditation and awareness and mindfulness in a deeper way. I think sometimes well, I know for myself, it's really easy to be in the physical body. And that's a really good tether point and really easy access point for lots of folks to just be present and aware is like, okay, where is your body, right? What do you feel in your body? And so it can be really easy to go into those super kind of physical exertion, fiery exercise practices. And I feel like in my journey, the more I've kind of been curious about that, the subtler the movement has gotten, right? I went from being a ballet dancer to a yoga practitioner and teacher to a Qigong practitioner and teacher to now acupuncturist, where like these teeny tiny needles are doing so much work and movement in the body. And so I feel like the Qigong practice, it kind of is a nice link between something that's more fiery and active, like, going to the gym or then going to yoga or like hot yoga that a lot of people like to do. But starting to slow things down so that we can widen our aperture. It's this sense of being able to play with time in a way. The slower that we go, sometimes the more we're able to see.
Less is more. Slower we go, the more we see. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of power in that.
So what
And
if the
there's a lot of power in that we miss when we're in our busy lives.
And so Qigong gives us that chance, what we need in this day to kind of slow down, which creates awareness, presence, which the nervous system really likes. And when we get that everything's connected, right? So the nervous system, we got the hormonal system, the endocrine system, and
Yeah.
all this can help optimize your fertility. And to circle back to the telomere effect, where they talk about the research by Elizabeth Blackburn and Alyssa Appel, they did show that when people addressed their telomere length, so Qigong being one of the tools, it impacted the child. So in Chinese medicine, we say that when the man and women meet, conception, in that hormone of
Hmm.
conception, the health of them leading up to conception, so those 3 to 4 months, and you talked about creating that, preparing the jing, nourish the soil, so getting healthy, and then the health of the woman throughout the pregnancy is setting up the jing of the child. So prenatal jing to postnatal jing, we talk about Chinese medicine, but this is epigenetics and genetics. Like the West also have a way to validate or describe what was spoken about 2,000 years ago. We can just now measure it in telomere length, but this was discussed a long time ago. And Qigong is one of the ways to cultivate this health and longevity to help you reach your peak fertility potential.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's again another, we talk about peak fertility potential. It's not just about the conception, but it's also about having a healthy baby and a healthy human in the world, after all is said and done.
Right. And yeah, and people are going to raise this child, right? You
Yeah.
want them to be healthy as well. Well, you have filmed a series of Qigong for fertility courses that are now available online at AcuBalance, and you're a big fan of community. So you talked about integration in multiple tools. So Qigong is one way, and you also talk about, and there's research on this, that community heals, right? And to have that community, and back in what was it, 2020 with COVID, we kind of lost our communities, didn't get together,
Hmm.
and so
Yeah,
um,
what year was that? I think we all lost track of time.
yeah, where are we now? And so I know there's the online videos, but I think you also want to have these like weekly meetups, and hopefully a lot of them in person in Vancouver, but also creating some still on Zoom where people can create that community online where you will have discussions about Qi Gong and fertility and also doing some practice, I think, right? That's kind of your plan. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, where we are with technology, we're not going to go backwards.
Right.
As lovely as it would be sometimes, we're not going to go backwards, right? But there's something really great about the tool of technology and meeting on Zoom and being able to connect in so many different ways. And I think there's a real power in community for sure. I know from my own practice and things like Buddhism and yoga, we talk about three pillars of learning, right? There's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the Buddha being maybe a teacher, the Dharma being maybe the teaching, and the Sangha being the community. That they all kind of feed off of each other, and they're all very important to sustain a practice like this of mindfulness and compassion and health and vitality in ourselves and for each other.
I'm fortunate, and so are the people that live in the Vancouver area, because you have these tools. So your background as a dancer, although you're not teaching patients to dance, it just gives you such an understanding, appreciation of movement of the body and the importance to move. And then you have your skill set in Qigong and yoga and acupuncture and just helping the body release the emotions, the trauma, which so many of us carry, which we believe can impede not only our well-being, but our getting to our peak fertility potential. And so it's a real blessing to have you around. And obviously I benefit too, because I get you to treat me and then I get to dig up at all my old problems and clear those. It's nice to get them cleared. So I appreciate you taking the time today to talk about Qigong for fertility. And thanks for recording those courses as well, because I know people are looking for other ways to optimize their health and their peak fertility potential. And as you said, Qigong is something you take with you. Like it's breathing, it's intention, thinking, like your meditative state, and some subtle movement, which you can do pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, do it anywhere.
All right.
I love that.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. And thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Conscious Fertility Podcast. Wishing you the best of luck on your journey to grow your family.